The topic of my analytical report for this class is going to be determining the role of the police in a capitalist society. For a number of years, I've wondered, is the role of the police now, and all the criticism you hear from the media and from the general public as far as police brutality and harassment and things like that, is that something that is atypical to how the police is supposed to be conducting itself, or is this possibly something that is inherently in the nature of policing since its inception? So we'll be discussing, asking some questions, and the questions we want to answer is: when and where was the first police force established, and what was the original intent of the original police force? Along with that, we'll look at how the concept of policing has evolved since its inception, and then we'll get into a little bit of how does policing differ based on the type of society it's utilized in, and what is the current role of the police in a capitalist society such as the United States that we are all familiar with. So first, looking at the origins of policing, one of the quick things we will realize is that the police were established to provide social control. They were not originally designed to fight crime, to investigate crime, ordinary crimes as we are used to them being portrayed today. This came by way of slave patrols. That was one of the earliest types of policing, was sheriffs and local militia groups being in charge of keeping control of slaves. And then that transitioned into controlling labor unrest, labor unions, strike breakers, things like that. And overall, they were seen as being developed to protect the social order, not so much to go after just simple crime fighting. So one of our first professional police forces, or a couple of them, were developed in London, 1829, and then also in a couple of U.S. cities, Boston and New York in the early to mid 1800s. Now, while these were the first professional police forces, as we'll go through this, we'll see a little bit how there were policing forces developed in certain areas as well. So slave patrols, going back to the early 19th century, the early 1800s, they were created with the intent to terrorize enslaved people, to prevent riots, to keep them in control, and to prevent any kind of an uprising. And they were also used to capture and escape slaves. After slavery was outlawed, after the Civil War, many of these slave patrol veterans continued into new Southern police departments and sheriff's offices during Reconstruction. And that continued a pattern of racially targeted law enforcement during the time of black codes and Jim Crow laws into the early 20th century as well. And along with racial control, they were also used in terms of labor control. So in the late 19th century, early 20th century, after the Civil War, as industry became more of a thing and labor unions became more of a thing, some police from the northern portion of the country were used as strike breakers to keep them under control, as well as immigration. And these police forces, or sheriff's units, whatever you want to call them, they joined in with local militias to create violence and clash with these labor strikes, and to, again, protect the social order and make sure they knew that they had to stay in their place. The Great Railroad Strike of 1877 was a good example of that. Now we'll look at some of the evolution of police functions and mainly how they changed through the 20th century. So that's where we see a lot of the evolution of the police force, once they became actually developed in the late 18th century, and then how they evolved to what we have now. So in the early 20th century, that's where we see some of the first professional police organizations. They started focusing more on actually emphasizing crime prevention and investigation as some of their key duties. They introduced some more modern management techniques, like better training technologies came into play, such as telegraphs, patrol cars, and then even some early forensic science. However, they did continue just enforcing the social order by crushing labor unrest and enforcing vice laws such as prohibition would be one of those. Another way to control the population. Getting towards the mid 20th century, we start to get into some civil rights era issues. The police were used again to maintain the racial order. Along with that, ironically, they increasingly emphasized the slogan "to protect and serve." That's where that started to become a slogan by them to try to offset some of the public image they were creating. There was a lot of the civil rights time events that we are all aware of. They used brutal tactics such as dogs, fire hoses to go after racial protests. The Selma to Montgomery marches in 1965, Bloody Sunday being one of the most brutal events in history for the civil rights movement that we can remember. There's also tons of urban uprisings, riots in major cities in the late 1960s. Harlem, Watts, and Detroit were some examples. And because of that, after the civil rights movement was successful to an extent in getting the Civil Rights Act passed, there were some efforts to move the police into more of a community-oriented type of police force in the 1970s. They encouraged officers to build relationships in their neighborhoods and emphasize the need for foot patrols and problem solving versus just being a force to take control of things. So once we get into the post-80s, we start to see some major changes in how police are used in the country. So the war on drugs in the 1980s and afterwards, the 1990s, that led to dramatically increased police engagement in communities of color. The crack epidemic and things like that are good examples of that, where communities of color were over-policed and given outrageous sentences for similar crimes to that of white people. And this led to very aggressive tactics where the communities themselves actually felt like the police were a occupying force more than a protected serve community. Post 9/11, we saw even more increased military-grade equipment. SWAT teams were the norm, even in some of the smallest towns where you wouldn't expect to see them. And this was all justified by the need to prevent terrorism or heavy crime after everybody was in fear from the shock of 9/11. And this sort of undid a lot of what was done in the 1970s to try to make the police more of a community organization, and it turned them back into more of an occupying force, a paramilitary response type of thing. And then technology continued to change policing, things such as computerized data, increased surveillance via cameras and phone tapping, all the kind of things that we're familiar with. And body-worn cameras became a new technology that was starting to be widespread. After that, even up until today, there's some numerous areas that police have been expected to take care of. Mental health crisis, school security, cybercrime, certain areas that police are not trained, don't have the resources to take care of, yet they are continuously falling under the same umbrella as policing. So what this is leading to is police being an armed force coming into scenarios that really don't require force of any kind or any violence or any armed people to be part of, and that can turn into violent interactions with people that simply might be having a mental health crisis. So that's where we are in this country today. Next, we're going to look at some ideological perspectives on policing. Now, this is going to get into certain things such as like Marxism, liberalism, critical race theory, things like that. Just sort of the perception of who the police are and what their intention is based on certain ideological perspectives. So starting with the Marxist perspective, the police are viewed as part of the repressive state apparatus. And this is something that was written about by philosopher Louis Althusser, that the police, courts, and military they all function together as part of the apparatus to protect capitalism, the wealthy class, those who own property. And this complements the ideological state apparatus, which is media, schools, everything that is used to teach, ingrain, and propagandize, what have you, the population to think a certain way about capitalism or the way things are supposed to be. And so the police are used essentially to take care of things when compliance is not happening with the ideological state apparatus. They are the armed force of the bourgeoisie, who is the property owning class. And overall, the police, their existence is based solely on the need to protect capital, to protect private property. Then we get into the liberal or the pluralist view. This is what a lot of people in the United States would actually probably consider communist or Marxist. In reality, it's a pretty center of the road mentality. And it's where the police are viewed as they are an imperfect organization, and they need reform, but they are ultimately good. It's the only a couple bad apples argument, where the concept of them being an organization needing overall reform is sort of looked down on, and it's simply we need to clean up a few bad apples, and we need to train better, we need to work on things like excess force and racism, and just do better training, and that will take care of the problem. Then you get into critical race theory, which this is a little bit towards the Marxist side of things, but also sort of walks the middle line. And it takes more of the racial approach to things more so than just the class approach. So it looks at policing as intertwined directly with a history of systemic racism and white supremacy in the United States. That it is designed to enforce racial hierarchy, and that it is designed to control the movement and the well-being, the lack of well-being of black and brown bodies, which this is evident in practices such as racial profiling, over-policing of minority areas, over-representation of people of color in the criminal justice system and prison population on the whole. And a lot of this is based on the fact that police are taught and trained and operate under the assumption that people of color are inherently more susceptible to crime and therefore should be policed more heavily accordingly. And as said before, the police are the enforcers of the racial order as well as the class order. So now we'll look at some contradictions in policing. These are areas where the police are either they say one thing and do another, or the community or the population expects one thing and the opposite thing out of them. And to the defense of the police, this does cause some issues in them kind of understanding and knowing what they're supposed to be doing and what is expected of them. So the first one would be public safety versus social inequality. Now, the fact of the matter is the police do good. They are a good source to be around. This comes in way of responding to 911 calls. Quite often they can be there very quickly and has to do some basic CPR, basic first aid, things like that, or just take care of things quickly while, whatever it is, the service needs to show up. Again, aiding accident victims, just their presence can help deter violent crime to an extent. But then along with that comes lack of equal protection given. So all of those things are all well and good, but there are times where they are found to be protecting certain people, certain classes, at the expense of others. They can be seen as a presence of intimidation, and unfortunately we see quite often them taking place with forceful or violent responses to peaceful situations. Run through a couple more of these real quick. Civil liberties versus law enforcement effectiveness. So, as we've seen in times after 9/11 or other public crises, police are kind of given broader powers. They're given more leeway to take care of keeping control of society. But what happens with that is then we run into where those powers are abused. We saw after 9/11, come to find out, there were Muslims being surveilled unconstitutionally, and due process not being respected. We see a little bit of that today, where there's a supposed crisis, public crisis going on, and law enforcement being given extra power where it's really not afforded them. Warrior mindset versus guardian approach. This is one that's under a lot of debate these days, but it's where the police, they are expected to be the protect and serve side of things while also being able to fight and able to defend. And we see during their training a lot, they are given the training to survive and take command presence and have tactical advantage over situations. And this can create an us versus them mentality where they're looking at the public as the enemy, essentially, or the potential enemy at least. And this contradicts with the guardian approach, where we expect them to communicate and have empathy and de-escalate situations to actually help the public that they're supposed to be protecting and serving. Accountability versus qualified immunity. They are empowered to enforce the law, but along with that, we expect them to be models of lawfulness. But in reality, what we see is things like qualified immunity, protecting law enforcement officers from civil lawsuits. They are shielded from the laws that they are supposedly enforcing against other people. And they have powerful police unions and internal review systems that often don't bring the results of these investigations out to the public. So in conclusion, what I've found through these studies is that policing does align more closely with its historical purpose of social control versus simple crime fighting than we really care to acknowledge these days. There are structural issues deeply rooted in economic and racial inequalities within the police system that will take more than simply some better training or some more funding or things like that, or getting rid of some bad apples. They are structural, deep-rooted issues that need to be addressed, admitted to, before they can be worked on. And that's going to be to get to sustainable reform. We can fix a lot of things very quickly with just removing some bad apples, but to actually change the system to how it's supposed to be, we need to go further than that. A couple of recommendations I have based on these findings and these conclusions, as we need to redefine the role of the police. We need to get them back to focusing strictly on serious crimes and delegate other social issues such as mental health response. We need to get social workers and mental health professionals to those scenarios, not armed police. We need to get people that are trained for school security in schools, not simply police who are in this warrior mindset. They don't belong in schools with their kids. And other social issues that just the police are being asked to be responsible for now, and they have no business dealing with those things, and they're not trained, they don't have the resources for it. Increased accountability. We need to take a hard look at qualified immunity, and we also need to get some real independent oversight on some of these situations that happen. In any scenario, any business, any government agency, the idea of an internal review is more or less a joke. There's no accountability there unless the public has full view of what's actually going on, what's being found out. And in order to hit on a few of those first things, we need to invest in community alternatives. We need to invest in government social workers, government mental health support programs. We need to address things such as systemic racism and poverty. There's studies abound that show that poverty is one of the main sources leading to crime, and that should be a pretty easy one to knock out, but it needs to have a serious look at it, and people need to take it seriously. Enhance the training and culture. We need to teach today's police about what their history is, where they came from, and if we're going to reform these historical facts, we need to actually acknowledge them and not just gloss over them. Those who are in law enforcement today need to know why these reforms are happening and what they're trying to be reformed from. And lastly, democratic community oversight. Again, getting back to the internal review system, the public needs to be involved. The public needs to have a say in how policing is done in their community. They need to be listened to. They need to have a say in what things need to change and what things are the problem. So overall, this is not an attempt to say that the police need to be gotten rid of, but there are some deep-rooted issues, historical facts that need to be addressed, admitted to, and ultimately rooted out and rewritten so we can move forward better as a society. Thank you.